Mm-mm.
Oh, now it did.
Got it. So you can stop it and then just do it again at right when you guys start.
Here. We're going to record this meeting, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Kane Marshall. I am the president of Team Good People, and this is Power Talks for March 26, 2024. Thank you again for joining. We've got a special one in store for us all today. Again, we are being recorded. If you could please keep, if it's possible to have your cameras on so we can see you, see who we're talking to, and get to know you a little bit, that's great. If not, no worries. But please keep your audio on mute so that we can all hear each other. If you could please also type your questions in the chat box. We'll try to keep things moving and flowing and answer questions as we go. But we will also get to the questions at the end from the chat box. And also, if you don't mind, if you could raise your hand, we'll try to get to you while we get through this presentation. With that being said, we've got tons of information here, and I'm going to kick things over to an all-star advisory committee member of Team Good People, Mr. Greg Hunteman from Pi Architects. Greg, please kick it off for us.
No pressure. So no, thanks to everybody for joining us. And so what we're going to do is kind of go through the emerging trends in operations development and repositioning. So kind of talk through some of the things that we're doing kind of right now. It's obviously a little bit more challenging to do new stuff. So definitely we're having to do some things and adjust some of the stuff that we're doing to accommodate that. So I'm Greg Hunteman with Pi Architects. We're based in Austin, Texas, have an office in Tampa as well. Marnie's kind of based in our Tampa office. She's on the call, and then Mark on the call is from our Austin office as well. From that standpoint, and so Nick and Eric, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Go first. Nick Herrick, Vice President of Development with LCS. We are a development consulting company that helps organizations navigate the development world.
Boom.
I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the Managing Director with Ziegler. We're based in Chicago, but have offices around the country. Our team does debt, equity, and M&A work within the senior housing space. We focus on the for-profit, but obviously have a large team on the not-for-profit senior living team as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys. So what we're going to do is kind of hit a variety of kind of topics. We're going to talk about kind of the way the consumers are changing a little bit, talk about kind of the master planning process and what you want to think through when you're doing that and the importance of that. Talk about kind of what we're doing as we're kind of resizing communities, whether it's an existing community we're repositioning or whether it's a new community, and kind of what we're doing now that was quite a bit different than what we did 5 and 10 years ago on that. Talk about some of the new models that we're dealing with within our communities. And then talk about some of the areas that have kind of seen a little bit more of a highlight in the new designs and stuff like that, new development. So Nick, do you want to start off with the changing consumer? And I think Eric, you had some insights on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of things that we're seeing around the development world, and even within operations. We've got a whole series that we've done just recently where our market research team has done a webinar similar to this, talking just about the changing consumer and the consumer of the future. But a lot of what we're seeing is the future resident wanting larger units, larger homes, 2 bedrooms. So your unit mix is very important, right? The days of smaller studios and 1 bedrooms dominating that unit mix are no longer. We definitely need to see a shift in that from a 50-50 to even a 70-30 is what we look at a lot of the time. 70% 2 bedrooms, 30% 1 bedrooms and studios. So if you're in that range, you're doing well. Lots of combination units, looking at taking the studios and 1 bedrooms when they're next to each other and combining them. It's a great trend to get that to convert. And then obviously expansions, definitely taking a look at that unit mix when you're looking at expansions as well. Some of the other things, wellness is obviously a very important to the consumer right now as well, and the 8 dimensions of wellness that go along with that, making sure that you're providing that space as part of your common amenities as well. And then of course dining. There's lots of conversation. We could probably have a whole hour just around dining and how that's changed, but the fine dining dominating the common space is no longer. It's definitely broke out into flexible dining, where you have cocktail lounges that can serve as a barista in the morning and a cocktail lounge in the afternoon and evening, can serve meals, a tapas menu, something like that. Casual dining is definitely more prominent in today's consumer. So fine dining, taking 75% and 25% of the space is actually flipped now, where fine dining is usually about 25% and casual dining and other venues are definitely on the higher side. The variety of menus is important in doing that as well, right? To make sure that you've got different menus and different venues as well. So I'll let Eric provide some context there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you were saying. I think we'll talk about some of the specific active adult things later, but like as far as the bigger units and cottages, a lot of the communities we're refinancing, you see waiting lists on the bigger IL 2-bedroom units, where some of the smaller studios and stuff are struggling to fill up, or some of the older awkward 2-bedroom ones that were but not done well, and they're coming back and knocking out a wall and doing some renovations. But certainly the larger units and different, and then like on dining, a lot of the more popular communities seems like have several options. Not just one big great dining hall, but several different options, including chef's kitchens and more intimate type settings.
Yeah, I would even add cottages and hybrid homes are another great example of how the consumers are changing. The ability to get more light into the units, having double-sided outside walls and windows, bigger windows as well, definitely brings all that light in and makes the space more voluminous.
And how do you feel?
Cottages. I was just gonna say, I mean, the cottages were popular before COVID, but since COVID, I feel like everybody, if you can add them, people have been adding them onto their sites, or and a lot of those same thing have waiting lists and can get you the amenities of the community, but you don't you can still have your own separate space and not necessarily be right in the middle of everything if you don't want to be.
Yeah, and where possible, we've been doing a lot more yards on the first floor units, where you actually take a portion of it and create a yard, and then you kind of get a little bit closer to the benefits of a cottage. We've also been increasing the size of porches on some units just to kind of show the value to the bigger porch. And so, we don't do it on all of them, just a portion of them. Have you guys been seeing an uptick on the quantity and the sizes of the porches in your total mix, whether it be IL and even in AL in some markets?
Yeah, most everybody wants a porch or a balcony in today's world, right? And I agree, the larger units, we've got spanning units on the top floors, almost penthouse units that have large outdoor spaces that we take advantage of as well. And being on the higher floors, just that viewpoint as well.
And we've been doing on some of our projects, we'll take the top floor and create it as kind of the executive or the higher end floor and do a little bit more to the units, whether the same or a little bit larger, and then providing a bit of a club room on the top floor where you do have the benefits of there. Now the club room is open to everybody, but yet there's that vicinity that's the benefit of the folks being on the top floor, and accentuating the finishes a little bit and doing more with the ceiling. Since it's the top floor, we can have some fun on that. Are you finding that the size and mix on a for-profit is changed any different than on an entrance fee community? How would you kind of compare the two? I know in general, the not-for-profit entrance fees have larger units, maybe a little bit more storage, maybe lean a little bit more to the active adult kind of averages. Are you guys seeing a change there?
Yeah, I think you're referring more to life plan versus rental than necessarily for-profit or not-for-profit. But yeah, I mean, the rental has always kind of been smaller, but they've definitely gotten into the life plan space with larger units, higher rents, of course, with that, right? But you're seeing the same trend that the smaller units are harder to sell than the two bedrooms.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, especially most of those are obviously higher end communities, rental communities, but we've done a couple lately that are all a lot of 2-bedroom units and fireplaces and things that normally would have been the more expensive life plan communities, and now they're still an expensive rental, but they're on a rental product instead of a traditional entrance fee.
That's a good point. When we're repositioning, we can kind of fix the mix by adding more larger units where they might not be there. David Slack, so the project that we're doing in Taylor, I know we did a little bit of digging and did a lot of market study stuff on that one. I know there was some back and forth, whereas the rental base were slightly smaller, but yet they still wanted all the amenities. What do you think about that, sir?
Said it correct.
We can barely hear you, sir.
What you said is correct. I agree with what you reported.
There you go. So we have an affirmative. So, so we have that there. Any other insights you have to share on that?
No, I'm fine listening to you guys. It's all right, but thank you for calling me out. But you do your talking.
So I'll let you know next time first on that. So, but no, so we have a project where we're expanding, and as part of that is trying to right size it. And the challenge was what is the different expectations of the residents of an entrance fee versus a rental, because we have both in the markets, although it's a not-for-profit that wants to kind of compete with an entrance fee model that we have on a couple of different buildings. So it's been fun to work through the process on that, which has been good. Another cool topic that you kind of brought up, Eric, was kind of how Ozempic may change the senior of the future and how that might adjust it. Do you want to elaborate on that topic? I thought that was a keen insight that we need to kind of think about and maybe even ask the audience their opinions on that.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about, I mean, there obviously was part of the wellness talk, but there's been studies by Goldman Sachs and others that are studying the effects of what the massive popularity of Ozempic and other weight loss drugs are going to have on the economy. The first, Ozempic in particular the company is based in Denmark, and their entire GDP growth of 1.8% last year was totally from the pharma industry. So there's that side, but then also I think the Goldman Sachs study was going into, over 40% of the US is considered obese, which leads to a pretty significant decline in workforce population over the years, and people staying home to care for people who have issues from health issues due to that they could solve from weight loss. So their study projected anywhere from 0.5% to over 1% GDP growth per year if they have different levels of what percent of the population would benefit from drugs like Ozempic. And so it would not only be people staying in the workforce longer, but also so many people that have to leave the workforce to care for people, so just the ways it could affect the economy and just as people age.
And then it could lead to a more capable resident that we have at the entrance. So it could be that the folks in the age group that we have, it may adjust the age a little bit, but when they come in, they're probably gonna be a little bit more capable. And so, how the wellness programs adjust for them and how we define that and kind of work with that. Because I think we are seeing some opportunities if we do create more wellness, social active areas, that it really does improve at least the pre-sales and the pre-marketing in the communities.
Yeah, and that's not the only thing, obviously, that's improving wellness, but it's something that can affect a huge percentage of the population. And you're right, if people are coming in healthier with, that need less care and can be more active and take advantage of a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about incorporating in communities.
Yeah,
So
it'll be interesting to see if that changes the average age of entry, for our residents, and with a healthier resident coming in, aging in place, and home health services and all that. And Greg, you mentioned, just right sizing, right? As we continue to have difficulties with skilled nursing and higher levels of care, if that continues that trend as well.
That makes sense. So let's switch over to master planning. So we've been doing a lot more engagements where we're almost doing a little bit more of the strategic master planning, where we're actually getting in a little bit earlier than what's already been defined, which is kind of nice to a variety of our clients. But really, it's hard when you go into a community that didn't think about it and kind of just did the greatest project in the world that's in the exact wrong place. And so, Nick, if you wouldn't mind talking through, because I think you guys have some of the most elaborate and detailed process on the master planning process. You want to kind of go through kind of what's important to make sure you define and how you do it and why?
Yeah. Greg, you hit it on the head on the nail when you're talking about building locations, right? But it's all about where we think it is, right? It's also talking about what's aligning with the organization, aligning with the client. So we take a deep dive and we facilitate a master planning process. to make sure that we are fully aligned with the organization, with the needs and the wants and the missions that are behind that, right? So letting them define what is important to them is really the first process. So we're diving in and trying to figure out what is important to our client first and foremost before we start putting anything on paper. So a lot of brainstorming, facilitating a strategic planning session on the front end before we start putting pens to the paper. It's very, very critical to make sure that we're aligned early and then collaborate throughout the process as well. But also incorporating the market and financial feasibility early in that process is important. So we can understand how we can potentially phase a project over time, right? Market may not be able to support 100 units if we're putting a 100-unit building in there, when we can do a 50 unit, and the absorption is so much better in that case, right? And it's it'll end up penciling differently as well, right? 100 units versus 60 units or 50 units is not going to pencil, and the associated amenity spaces and other things that the community wants to improve are definitely important, but we got to have that revenue stream to support that. So it's a fine balance between revenue generation and non-revenue generation spaces, right? To make sure that it does pencil, and then the market will fully support that as well.
No, that's important. I think, your team did an amazing job working on the Carillon in Lubbock, was Texas Tech property, because it's a community that has probably not kept up generally as a community. And there was a lot of challenges within the board and stuff like that. And, taking the time to kind of work with them on what they want, why, what was important to them. I mean, we got almost complete engagement with the residents and the staff and everybody. So by the end, they were all like, just yes, because that was exactly what they'd asked for. We had to put it together in a way that made sense for them. But I think that engagement and that ownership, I guess, really made a big difference. And it's not always easy when you have a contingent of the residents as part of the board. So to get them involved and to get pretty much complete buy-in was amazing.
Yeah, collaboration is the key part there.
So I think that's really good. And I know, a lot of times, it's key to look at what the community kind of can be, but there's like different ways of doing it. There's the way to do it where it's like, what do we want it to be? What does what does everybody think it should be? What is it currently? And where is there something in between that's an easier, like we can force it real hard and spend a lot of money and overthink it. But in the end, it's always going to massage down to something that, the community kind of wants to be to a certain extent. So a lot of times we're kind of working through the process and looking at a couple different options as we do that. And innately, it's always the one that seems to lean into good phasing, because phasing is super big. And then making sure that everybody within the community gets something, right? Because you want to make sure that you're not just focusing on one part, that everybody gets a little something, that there's not, well, you gave them that and we didn't get something. So just enough that everybody kind of gets a little bit of something out of the match planning process, I think has been especially helpful on the different projects that we're doing. And then constantly going back and forth on the pro forma to make sure it makes sense, because sometimes it may not completely make sense. And so if we can start running the numbers early, because I know that the team there did a great job of running the numbers early so we could validate what does make sense, and they're doing it in a way that it kind of plays into the phasing too, so we can bring in the income as early as possible in the process. I think makes a lot of sense. I know the project that we're working with David as well on, that one, that was a big consideration. What can we do that makes sense, and how do we do it in a way that works with the financing? So that one, with the mixed spread on the financing that we have there with the USDA, as well as probably more, bond type financing with Ziegler. It's an interesting hybrid on how we put things in different places on the financing side, because right now the rates that we can get at USDA they're amazing comparatively. So maximizing that as best we can. So we're working through the process to do that.
Yeah, we'd love to involve our finance partners and architects and operations and everybody involved. We also view it as a live living document as well. So it's something that we come back to, right? So you finish the phase one, is a phase two the same that you thought of 5 years ago? Probably not, right? So what are the changing dynamics that are happening? But it gives you a footprint and an outline that you can at least go back to and start that conversation again on, and you're not having to recreate the wheel. This is what we anticipated. Is it the right move? Is it not the right move? And the market's going to tell us what that is.
That's smart. Westminster did that, right? We did the master plan about 5 years ago, kind of fixed a lot of the things, but the commons area still needed a bit of a improvement and better interconnection of the buildings. And as we went through the process through the second phase, it gave us the opportunity to rethink what we had done, and integrate pickleball, ironically, became a big part of that as far as a rooftop pickleball area. So it gave us a chance to reach out to the residents too and think what they want and get their buy-in again on it. So Chuck and the team there at Westminster, I think, did a great job of that. That's Westminster's in Austin.
Yeah, and it's amazing, the experience that the residents have and the information that they have as well. Don't be afraid to ask. They'll tell you, right? They're gonna give you the information of what they want and what they think they need, and they're not afraid if you offer it up.
So the other thing that we kind of wanted to review today was how we're kind of right-sizing communities or changing them, and it does depend, because Carillon's an interesting kind of community that we worked on, because it has 140 nursing beds, which is in 7 groups of 20, right? So it already has kind of a cool small housey kind of design in the way it is. So it has too many nursing, but at the same time, they're doing fairly well today in the quantity of nursing beds they have. So it's that delicate balance to say, okay, you're doing good here, but what are your rates and how does that play into the equation? But then in the long run, do you really want that many, right? That many total nursing beds. So we did take it down to 80 and then take the other half of the building and adjust it so that we could add additional assisted living, and then convert the nursing beds, which were a nursing licensure, which is a little bit more expensive to manage, and then take it to an assisted living licensure, which typically makes more sense for a memory care setting. From that standpoint. So I think that was an interesting way that they looked at adjusting the mix and how they have it on that campus. And then they had a real big need for assisted living, because their current assisted living was pretty much a converted nursing home. I mean, it was a little bit better than that, but unfortunately not as much. So that was a real big focus for them. So it was the assisted living that was making it difficult to market prospective residents in some instances. So that was a big part of their master plan there. Nick, as far as when you're doing a repositioning as opposed to a new build, how are you finding that your program, because you guys have a very great distinct program that you like to kind of generally follow when possible, how are you finding that mix might be changing overall as percentages or total numbers, whatever you think, to define that?
Yeah, just like unit mix is very important. The overall mix of higher levels of care are very important of course, for a life plan community is what I'm referring to in most cases. So entrance fee, life plan communities, having that internal demand being enough that you're not having to so rely on the external demand. We use a lot of ratios, 1 to 4 for every 1 nursing bed, and that includes AL and memory care. We want 4. That's changing to 1 to 5 to 1 to 6 even, right? Heavier on the independent living, especially in the today's harder market where nursing care is harder to make money and harder to pencil out. We need the additional IL revenue associated with that to help projects kick off and continue to be successful as well. We're seeing a lot of conversions of skilled spaces as well. Greg, you can speak to this as well. A nursing care room is very similar in size to a memory care room. So we're seeing a lot of conversions to memory care, where we'll take wings and create memory care if memory care is not already on the campus, or if there's a higher demand for memory care as well throughout that. So it's a lot of trends that we're seeing today around right sizing. Not everybody has the ability to increase IL, right? So when we do, I've got an example in South Carolina at Rolling Green Village. They've got 175 acres, 291 patio homes that are not associated with the community, but they have a lot of green space that they can expand. A lot of these older communities started as skilled nursing facilities and have evolved to add independent living now, and we're looking at adding about 300 over the course of the next 15 years, probably, 10 to 15 years. We've started that process. They started with 128. We added 83. We're looking at adding 122 into this next phase, and then we've got another 100 after that that are scheduled. So again, having that strategic alignment and that master plan in place to be able to execute on that is very important, even in right sizing communities.
That's smart. And how are you deciding what quantity of those IL-ish should be more in a cottage versus an apartment versus a hybrid home? And maybe we should probably define, does everybody know what hybrid homes, because it is a bit of a unique building where you park below and you do the units on the second, third, and or fourth floor. And it can be anywhere from 12 to 16 units to, we've done as many as 48 and the PVN campus in Dallas. Nick, how have you, is there a percentage there? Is it a little bit more community to community?
Yeah, there's definitely more art than science when it comes to that. I think a lot of it's just land planning and understanding grades and topos and everything else that play into the ability. You can't always put that flat, 300-foot building on a site when you've got grade change of 20 feet across that as well, right? So you got
only 20.
Step it down, and well, I'm being nice. Step it down and be able to accommodate the topo. And so, that's where the cottages and hybrid homes definitely play into it. And taking the theory of potentially using a hybrid to even step that down instead of retaining walls is an opportunity where you can enter at two different heights potentially and have your under building parking kind of being your retaining wall, as opposed to building an expansive retaining wall at a very high cost.
Yeah, kind of exposed basement, basically, from that standpoint.
Yep.
I would say in order to increase the independent living numbers of units, we are looking a lot on kind of how close they are to the commons. And if they're not, do we need to create some secondary little areas that are kind of supportive? And we do like to create little kind of neighborhoods if we can within those communities still, even if it's just on the first floor of buildings that are fairly adjacent. The other thing that we're doing is really integrating home health a little bit better and providing space specifically for them. We do have some clients that actually own, and the home health is part of their operations from that standpoint. You're still going to get people from the outside that are participating in that, but we want to make sure that you have enough space for the people to be able to be housed there. Say if you do some outpatient or do some home health physical therapy services, how are they storing some of those things? So storage can be important. If it is adjacent to more of your wellness suite, is there a separate little kind of therapy clinic exam room that can occur for that? And is that actually accessible from the home health office as well? So there's different tweaks you can do to that. Telehealth, obviously big in that situation. So as you're looking at, especially on a kind of a more of a better integration of wellness and home health and stuff like that, think through how that can come together. We found some neat ways to kind of very cost effectively kind of just do some adjacencies on the project there in Taylor, is to kind of just really pump up the home health with the wellness and the clinic and exam space. That I think made a lot of sense there. The first presentation that we did here at Power Talks was kind of talking about the nursing homes and how we were resizing those and work with communities. And so we worked with Human Good on their community in Santa Barbara called Val Verde. And in that community, it's a little wild because Oshpod, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, is a really challenge to work with, but they're great considered to the city compared to the city of Santa Barbara. They're even more difficult. So to build a new nursing home in that community is near impossible from a time frame. I mean, it took them 6 years to a dog park. So it's just a little bit of a challenge. So for them, although they would have preferred, and they're still looking at it, a new nursing home, they wanted to see how do they repurpose their existing nursing home to have it make sense. And since they were going from 72 down, I think it was 36, 32, it gave us an opportunity to rethink that and do it in a way that we had one area that leaned more into the small house that was more the long-term care for the community itself, but then also do it where we had a separate area that was more rehab focused, that was more inclined to lean to families and spouses and stuff like that were visiting, and then do it where it had a very strong outpatient component, knowing that, hey, they have these, I think, 200 plus villas on the community. How do we do that outpatient and integrate it in a way that they have a separate entrance and don't feel like they're coming into the nursing home to do the outpatient? So that was a big part of that design, and it made a lot of sense and allowed them to think through, one option to utilize their existing space and then do it much more cost effectively than a new building as well. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, we're also seeing organizations considering not even doing skilled nursing, especially in like California where it's highly regulated with OSHPD, with the ability to serve your residents out of assisted living and higher levels of care within assisted living, not have that skilled nursing function is something that organizations are also looking at.
Exactly. So that's really changed things. And there's some, and we haven't done this yet, but I'm curious. There's a newer model where they're doing independent living and memory care. So basically they're saying we can do almost everything in independent living, but I can't do memory care in independent living. So let's do a small memory care component tied to the independent living, which is quite interesting to kind of think about. I know we were visiting with Greystone on some stuff yesterday, and that was real important to them to think through, how can I do that and how does this make sense, as we're putting together these new communities. And I think they have one, I think right now in San Antonio that's kind of leaning in that direction, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those will license all the IL units as AL, but rent them as IL or a mix of IL so people can age in place. But then, like you were saying, Nick, a lot of the communities, we're working on the new campuses. So there's not a lot of them, but the majority of them do not have skilled nursing unless there's a requirement by the city. And then, instead of right sizing them, a lot of the traditional not-for-profits that we've been working with, they just are selling the skilled nursing entirely to a for-profit operator, or if it's not possible to sell it off, you can lease out that portion of the community to a different operator. And one thing I was going to add too, when you were talking about some of the repositioning, a lot of on the standalone skilled nursing or some of the older outdated AL, a lot of that is, we're working with behavioral companies to convert that into different there's all different types of addiction and rehab and treatment, but those older buildings tend to have a good footprint to get repositioned into behavioral.
That's smart. And then it's easier for them to use some of the lack of accessibility too that are in the older buildings too that we deal with. And what's interesting, going back, so Grand Living does one of the buildings that you're talking about, Eric, where it's kind of the IL. It's a completely licensed AL building, but they have half the units that look more like IL and half of them that look more like AL. But what's interesting is we have another client, Investcorp, that does that. But it's neat. They're more intertwined. They really don't do as much segmentation as we do normally on a campus. But what's neat is that they can, as a new resident comes into the community, they can direct them based on how the resident sees themselves, what is their financial capacity and what they're doing, and then kind of put them into either side of the building, which generally, again, it's kind of managed the same way. You're probably a little lighter on the care side, on more of the AL light, I guess you could say, or the IL plus from that standpoint. But it's created a kind of a neat model that's kind of in between and allows you to do one building that can cater for more people. So you get your efficiencies up within the building itself.
Yeah, I think it works well for most people, but it does, depending on where you're building and what the building codes are, it can add to the cost quite a bit to have a licensed unit for a unit.
Exactly. So that does make a big difference. That's a good point from that standpoint. So let's switch a little bit into we're seeing a lot more of the active adult buildings that we're kind of working with, and that leans a little bit more into some of the conversations where, from a cost perspective, you're kind of building a little bit more of a multifamily building, and then it buys you a little bit more flexibility into hitting the middle market. So right now, that's kind of a huge challenge to the industry, right? So we're working with Nick trying to figure out how to kind of work with this, Nick, how to work through this. Because right now the challenge is you can only do so much, but as soon as you add a bunch of services and a bunch of required pieces and parts, it just gets too expensive. Whereas if you lean a little bit more into the active adult model, basically you're paying for the rent, and then you kind of pay for kind of a reduced community center program and amenities. And really it's a little bit more resident driven from that standpoint. So you end up really substantially cutting the monthly fee. So you might have a fee that's $2,000 to $3,000 as opposed to $4,000 to $6,000, or whatever that number is in that market. So it can make a big difference. We do have some clients that are doing what they're calling unbundled IL, which is kind of a hybrid between those two, where you're basically doing an independent living building, but you're basically not requiring that 1 meal a day, or you might adjust kind of the spend down program that you have on it. But you do it in a way that it does allow you to get a younger active adult person in there, as well as allow them to age in place and request more services. So it gives you a little broader spectrum of what you can do there. And usually on the hybrid model, you're kind of building a little smaller dining room, a little smaller kitchen. You know, you're assuming that as the building ages in place, so you're going to do multiple dining times. So you have a smaller dining room, which I think feels better normally, because a lot of times you'll come into these communities and they'll have this huge dark dining room for, you know, quite a bit of the day. And it's hard to multi-use the dining room, unfortunately, from that standpoint. So we're seeing a lot more of that. Eric, I know you're working on some cool cottage communities, which kind of overlap the active adult. That's kind of what we've always had for active adult. But it sounds like you had a neat project.
Yeah, I think, you know, an active adult is still one of the widest ranges of what people consider active adult. You know, everything from where, you know, right now a lot of the newer stuff is more mid to high rise luxury, highly amenitized stuff, because that's what pencils today with higher costs and higher rates. But like you said, there's also, we're working with some developers. These are particularly, there's 4 communities in New Jersey. And if anybody's ever developed in New Jersey, you know how difficult it can be there. But these have all been really well received by the cities, because they're really more of a, you know, a middle market kind of, you know, type affordable type community, where you know, the traditional IL cottage in their market's going to rent for $5,000 to $9,000 at least a month. And these, so what they're doing, you have to have a little bit more land. They're kind of set on 12 to 15 acre sites, so they're usually in the suburbs, but they're doing a modular construction for all single story cottages. And so they'll be built, they've contracted with a couple of companies that are out of state, and then, you know, so they can bring them in on schedule. But what they do is, you know, build, so if there's 130 units on average in each community, they're going to be built around a community center, but then each one is in a pocket neighborhood. So you've got like 8 to 10 homes that creates its pocket neighborhood, and they're stacked around each other. So you've got, you know, 8 to 10 little neighborhoods in a bigger walking neighborhood surrounded by the community center. And so they're, you know, because they're modular, the construction time is 9 to 12 months for the whole community to be set in place. And, you know, they can come in with the pads and, you know, set them down and construct across the site and allow people to move in on one side of the site while they're still, you know, constructing the other side of the site. So for them, you know, they're cutting the interest carry, you know, a lot of it in half from a normal construction project, but also getting residents in there. And then, you know, on the cost side, I think we're, even with the land in New Jersey, they're like $250,000 to $275,000 a unit, whereas more of our traditional active adult right now are at least $400,000 a unit. So, you know, they can offer rents that start, you know, $2,500 for your own 1-bedroom cottage, or maybe up to $4,000 for a bigger 2-bedroom and 2-bath type cottage. And then where they, you know, expect to be able to keep people, get them in there and stay longer through aging in place, is they also own the home health service agency, which will serve the community. And they're doing, they're including 2 free hours in your rent a month. And that can be, you know, help with meal prep, or, you know, whatever you need or want, you know, for that. And then any additional time you need or want would obviously be an additional charge. But, you know, for a lower cost product, I mean, they've still got 60% margins. And, you know, there's a lot more, especially in today's market where capital is so tight for projects like this one. It's got a lot more interest from both lenders and equity, just because of the price point, and, you know, how many more people it'll be able to reach that can afford it.
How many FTEs are they looking at? Are they letting this be completely resident, kind of run and then just kind of monitored, or they do actually have FTEs on site?
They will have a few, but it's really only, you know, there's a lot of the walking space and connective trails and things, but, you know, the amenity stuff is really a community center and not much beyond that. As far, you know, they're located near other city center things that, you know, people can access, but so they really only need between, you know, sales and maintenance and people, you know, you're only going to have 2 to 4, you know, kind of real full-time employees. And then, And then obviously the home healthcare agency separate.
Yeah, those are awesome. And then we have some folks that are looking at doing this, but more as satellite communities. So say you have a hub, right, which probably has a little bit more healthcare than you might do in a normal project. But how do you hit the remainder of the client, say, or the remainder of the community? Say you're landlocked, you're trying to figure out what to do. So one opportunity you can do is do a satellite kind of building, which basically says, hey, how can I hit a little bit more of this IL activable model, kind of get some of those entrance fees, say if you do an entrance fee model, to kind of help cover it, which is a little bit easier in today's kind of financial equation from that standpoint. But then you can do it where you kind of leverage the reputation of the community, and then you can put it next to where a lot of the amenities already exist. So in Austin, you might want to be next to the Domain because that's cool, right? It'd be fun. You have all those amenities that are right next to you. So it gives you an opportunity to start using your main community as kind of the hub to support it. And then you can start planning the secondary buildings kind of around the community in the right areas. That makes a lot of sense. And we're talking to a Jewish community that they're trying to figure out how to do that, but they like it because it allows them to hit different income qualifications. Because as a mission for them, they're not just hitting more of that middle to upper income resident. They really want to provide services and amenities to people who can't necessarily afford it. So that might mean it's not going to be in the same location. It might specifically be in an area that's centric to them and centric to that kind of financial kind of qualified folks within that area. So it gives them a lot of flexibility to manage and think about it, and also helps us do it in a way that it can be phased and it fills up in a better way. So it's kind of a neat model that I think is fairly new from that standpoint.
Yeah, something that we've been studying here at LCS as well. Are there opportunities to expand when landlocked? You know, you got communities that have high waiting lists and no ability to expand. What other options can we do? And satellite campuses is something that definitely is something that we look at. Could be, a smaller 5 acre of cottages. It could be a large 60 unit, 100 unit IL building with some amenities. It's really finding that right mix that makes sense in the marketplace.
That makes a lot of sense. So the next topic is kind of wellness. We've kind of talked a little bit about that on the periphery, but it's still kind of growing and becoming more and more important to the communities, and it means a lot of different things to different folks. So when we kind of start with the master planning process, a lot of times we like to ask them what wellness currently means to them, what they kind of tell the prospective residents they're actually doing for wellness, and what they would like to do, right? And those usually 3 very different answers, right? Because they're trying to use their existing building as well as they can, but it probably has some challenges to it. So as they are looking at a repositioning or a new community, how can they redefine it? So what I like for them to do is actually think a lot more on what they would like to have for the residents, what they think would increase the stay for the residents there, and what would make sense, right? What do they want to sell and market and provide? And it gives them a neat opportunity, because usually we don't get as much into the operations and what things could be to that level. But I think on the wellness is important for them to kind of buy into it, because everybody's kind of used to doing what they do, which again, it can be a very little or a lot. And so it's neat to get them excited and then put that into, say, the brand or how they're setting up this kind of core framework for their community repositioning, that they kind of continue to go back and forth and say, well, when we discuss wellness, we talked about how this was really important. Are we really doing that? Or when you start to value engineer projects, if things get a little tight on the budget, now if you value engineer it, now what did we say about this? Because wellness isn't necessarily dollar for dollar. And so, but what does it do? How does it help the marketing and sales? So we really focus a lot on that from that standpoint there. I know what we're seeing a lot more is specific group fitness areas that are actually more digitally set up, where it does give you the opportunity to come into the room and digitally kind of put in kind of with a screen or some kind of program that you have, kind of set up a specific exercise regime or class that you can do. I know that a lot of times the classes are becoming a lot more social. So it gives you a lot more control on what you're doing. It gives the residents a lot more opportunity to set up the classes that they want. So they can select that and they can say, okay, ladies, we're going to do a Zumba, I don't know, Michael Jackson class, whatever that is, right? And so they can all get together and basically just have, a Zumba party, which has been a lot of fun to see how those can integrate into the communities from that. So we're seeing a lot more of the group fitness areas We do have some folks that are putting physical therapy relatively close to it because there is a benefit when the therapists are close and can give more direct assistance to the residents. It also helps them as they transition from the therapist to the equipment in some kind of regime that they have. Having equipment that kind of keeps track of what the residents are doing and can show the growth and performance is super neat. When you can have a new resident, new family that comes in and you say, your dad came in, he was doing great, but boy, over the past 6 months, it's been amazing what he's been able to do. And to set it up in a way that becomes a little bit more of kind of gamifying it to a certain extent, where we can make it a lot of fun and get a little competition between the residents is cool. I know Kane just kind of got his butt whooped by the pickleball champion. Pickleball is a huge piece of it. From that standpoint, the outdoor kind of amenities. Nick, what are you seeing that you guys have tried to integrate?
Yeah, we see a lot of outdoor amenities, pickleball, all the putting greens, bocce courts, gardens, raised garden beds, all that. It's definitely outdoor activities, getting people outside a lot more, and it takes advantage of some of those spaces that used to be like courtyards and not heavily used, right? Lots of walking trails as well, making sure that's integrated into the overall master plan as well. One of the other things that we also do that's a little bit unique is that we have 7 licensed architects on our staff. We don't do any of the drawings. We rely on Greg and folks like that to do the stamp drawings and everything, but helping to understand the architectural program so we can take a community and do what we call an architectural analysis, a program analysis, space analysis, and quickly identify where spaces are underutilized. Small auditoriums, for example, or very little wellness spaces, game rooms, card rooms, and identify quickly what potential areas can be addressed to work through as we're strategically planning with our partners. That's one of the first steps we take as part of our master planning process, as well as really taking a look at and diving into the community on what amenities they have currently and what amenities could they be adding, and then surveying, right? Getting feedback, whether it be focus groups or surveys of the current residents, to be able to understand what people are wanting and needing there.
That's really big, and really, letting the building flow to the outside really is huge. We have kind of more of a biophilic focus now, where we're really trying to bring the green inside and then let them see outside. So to be able to kind of be in that environment, we're doing quite a more. So one of the models we've been integrated lately is more of a conservatory approach, which says, hey, we know that we want residents to be outside. We know we want them to have the sun, the vitamin D, which can help in many ways. But in some environments, it's hard to do because it might be too cold, too hot. And you could have all 3, temperature ranges in one day in some environments. So we had a community where we had an indoor pool, and it was fairly central. And, after doing some of the analysis, we realized that the pools only get used by about 10 to 12% of the residents, right? So the question became, is that the best use for this space? And as we worked through it, we realized that a conservatory, more of an indoor-outdoor kind of park amenity, was really cool. It has the opportunity to open up immediately outside, but yet internally it's programmed where you have dining, activity, social, planting spaces there. The coolest place for the Christmas tree ever, right? Indoor movies and stuff like that. So it gave them an opportunity to really think through that. And I know at the community here in Austin at Westminster, that community is a little challenging in that it has 2 floors that are kind of main building. And in that building, we're trying to figure out a way to transition from one floor to the other. So this kind of conservatory atrium space is enabling us to do that, where it connects the 2 levels a little bit better. But it really does kind of lean into that wellness kind of methodology from that standpoint. Is anybody seeing some unique wellness areas that they're kind of integrating into their communities, whether it be outdoor, indoor areas? Come on, Pat, you got to be doing something, man. No pressure.
I don't know that I have anything to add, Greg, beyond what you've already said. I think all those things are accurate, and the demand and the desire we're seeing from especially the newer residents moving in is kind of lines up with all those things you just rattled off for sure.
That's cool. And the Bernie campus is so cool. I mean, it has so many of those kind of areas to kind of take advantage of
Yeah, it does.
from that standpoint. So that's been a lot of fun to kind of take over there. You had talked, Nick, before that you're finding a lot of people will kind of utilize their multi-purpose room where they don't have all the spaces that they've kind of utilized that. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, and even further, just flexible spaces. So you may have a theater that could be a classroom or a card room if it's set up properly. Auditoriums are no longer just set up for auditoriums. It can be group fitness as well, with partition walls, removable partition walls, making sure that the space just isn't sitting empty. You know, a lot of those large spaces, when they've only got one purpose, they sit empty most of the time, and that's not valuable. That's a lot of valuable space just sit empty. So making sure that we've got flexible programming that goes along with that in the design of those spaces.
That's really good. And I don't know who else been to the Presbyterian Village North campus in Dallas. They kind of went to the nth degree in the wellness center that we did there, in that they did it more holistically, in that you come in, you have a healthy options cafe. So you kind of focus on the food first, right? The nutritional side of it. They then had a clinic, they had a spa. So they focused on that side of it. They had a couple of group exercise rooms. And then they had their typical gym that they had there. They had the physical therapy suite that was right adjacent to it, but it felt more like you're working with a trainer as far as from that segment of it there. And then they had an indoor pool that, instead of doing a lap pool, the indoor pool really leaned more into the aerobic side of things, that it had the right levels. Because the challenge with a lot of pools is you have people at different heights and you want to be at a certain level when you're doing the water aerobics. So working with the pool that kind of leans in that direction, gives you the flexibility, is real big. And then do it in a way that has a good place for the person that is leading the water aerobics classes, that they can be seen and heard, is real important from an acoustic standpoint. So a lot of things to think through from that. The next session that we're doing, our next retreat for good people in Ouray, one of the big topics there is with Terry Rogers at Westminster Communities of Florida. And he's actually broadening what he considers wellness. So what they're doing there, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is how do we actually try to capture people a little younger, but how do we actually think of it more as a science and integrate more services and care to them? So as we bring them into this, and if you're kind of following Huberman and Peter T and stuff like that, there's some things you can do early on to help increase your success later in life. So how do you do that, but kind of bridge that which might be the 50s and 60s age group, to this, 80s and 90s age group? So how do you do something that leans into this longevity movement that does say, hey, we're going to start actually analyzing, keeping track of, what is your VO2, what is your different blood characteristics and stuff like that. So really looking a lot more at the preventative side of it that unfortunately you don't always see these days. So it'll be fun to think through from him. He's doing a new community outside of Orlando and Mount Dora, that this is a big part of what we're thinking about. And how do we do that? But a big part of that community also is right sizing it, where it is leaning a lot more into the independent living, the cottages, the hybrid homes, and a little bit more of affinity lifestyle. So really that's a big part of it now, especially in kind of the lakes region of Florida. So that's kind of fun to see how that all's coming together. So anything else on the wellness side? I think we've kind of hit almost everything in our thing here. I know we've kind of overlapped a little bit. Any kind of development considerations, Nick, that you want to kind of close us out with?
I think that, the biggest thing is just making sure that you've got market and financial feasibility in mind when you're putting together the plans. Don't get too far down the road through design before you have that check and balance, right? Make sure you're looking at the feasibility ahead of time on the front end, really before you start the project, so that you can make sure the project's successful. Everybody wants a successful project. No one wants a dud, right? So
that's awesome. And we're doing a lot more kind of tying with the intergenerational side, which we're kind of not creating the seniors so separate, but really integrating them more into communities. So I think as you're looking at siting a new building, what adjacencies would really be a real benefit to that community, which may allow you to kind of provide additional things for the residents, but it also may allow you to downsize some of the other commons areas that you'd have for that. So it's kind of a win-win kind of from that perspective. So I think that can make a big difference as you're thinking through the process. So cool. Any last words of wisdom, Eric?
No, I mean, we didn't really touch on the financing side, which is probably better for most people on the phone, but no, I think it's getting better in general. I mean, the Fed is still signaling 3 rate cuts this year. They have to kind of be a little cautious around the, being an election year and not wanting to look political. So, maybe one in June and then some at the end of the year or something. But, some of the banks are getting a little bit more, comfort, I guess, with what capital requirements they'll have. So, we're expecting them to get more active towards the end of the year. And, there's plenty of equity out there, but most of it's looking for distressed deals right now. So, some of that will turn around as well. So I think in general, the markets are slowly improving.
And how are you seeing the affiliation side of it? We did talk a little bit about that. Are you still seeing that pretty active?
So for sure, like we have a transitions group, and that's all they're doing is, transitions from usually a single site that's being affiliated into a larger campus system. There's been a lot of that, for different reasons but that's definitely one area that we've seen over the last couple of years has picked up a lot.
Yeah, for different reasons. That's real important. Well, anything else from you, Nick, sir?
Not that I have at this point. I think we covered a lot of topics today. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to everybody. One of the things that we got to keep in mind, and I know it's a difficult topic to look at, but is just entrance fees keeping up with marketplace, right? The housing has gone crazy here in the last few years. Have we kept up with that pricing, right? I know we go through and do market rates annually, and that increase can be anywhere from 4 to 12% over the years. Usually it's 4%, 4%, 4%, 4%, right? But we need to keep up with the marketplace and keep up with the housing demand as well. So I would encourage taking a deep dive and taking a look at entrance fees and pricing them appropriately. That's what's going to help us get future development moving forward as well. Interest rates are still very, very good, right? If we were spoiled for a long time having those low interest rates, but if you look at it from a historical standpoint, 7%, 5%, those are still great interest rates. So it's not Eric's fault that they went up, by any means.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. So any other thoughts you have on future topics, please feel free to share, because we're kind of continuing to evolve that. Kane, you want to take it home, sir?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in and say thank you to everybody. I have one quick question, but first and foremost, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank Nick, Greg, and Eric for dropping knowledge, giving us all this information. Thank you so much. And then my one last question before we all check off here. Greg, did you actually mention Michael Jackson Zumba?
Yeah, you haven't heard of that?
I'm in. I'm down. I thought that's what it was, and I'm in. Where are we finding this class?
There you go.
Greg hosts that on Friday nights.
Exactly. What I really want to do is a silent disco version of that. So you see all these people that are kind of flailing around while having fun. But I guess that's not quite as social, but it'd still be fun to do.
Sounds like fun. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Team Good People.
Thank you,
Talk
everyone.
to everybody soon.
Appreciate it, everybody.
See you guys on the circuit.
Bye-bye.